It happened during the final phase of SEAL training. A woman stood silently on the wet sand, ignored by everyone, her face half hidden under her cap. When the commander stopped in front of her, his smirk said everything. "You sure you're in the right place, ma'am? This isn't yoga class." The platoon erupted in laughter. He ordered her into the pool for a drown-proofing drill, wrists tied, ankles bound. But when she dropped beneath the surface and stayed there far beyond what any recruit could endure, the laughter stopped. What happened next changed everything. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories of hidden strength and unexpected heroes, subscribe for more moments that remind us true respect is earned in silence. The fog hung low over Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, shrouding the training compound in a ghostly gray light. Pre-dawn air carried the scent of salt and wet sand as 36 recruits lined up on the gravel-covered area known as the grinder. Their breaths created small clouds in the cool morning air. The formation was perfect, boot heels aligned, shoulders squared, eyes forward, except for one figure who stood slightly apart from the others. Lieutenant Commander Adira Keshet stood at the end of the formation, her uniform identical to the others, but somehow setting her apart. Her cap was pulled low, shadowing features that most of the men hadn't bothered to study. Water still dripped from her uniform, evidence of an early morning swim completed before the others had even rolled out of their bunks. The moisture left dark patches on the gravel beneath her boots. None of the men spoke to her, few even glanced her way. 3 days into Hell Week, and most had decided she was either a temporary political experiment or someone else's problem. Either way, she wouldn't last. Senior Commander Thaddeus Blackwood strode onto the grinder at precisely 0500 hours, his weathered face set in familiar lines of contempt. 26 years in the Navy had carved those lines, etched them deeper with each class of recruits he'd broken down and rebuilt. Behind him walked his aide, Lieutenant Sorrel Parker, tablet in hand, his younger face showing none of his commander's hardened edges. "Morning inspection, gentlemen," Blackwood announced, deliberately emphasizing the last word as his gaze swept over the formation. His eyes skipped past Keshet, as if she were invisible. He moved down the line slowly, critiquing uniforms, questioning readiness, testing mental fatigue after 3 days of minimal sleep. The recruits stood rigid, knowing any sign of weakness would bring special attention they couldn't afford. When Blackwood finally reached Keshet, he paused longer than necessary. His eyes narrowed as he read her name tag with exaggerated attention. "Keshet," he said, rolling the name around his mouth like something distasteful. "What kind of name is that for a SEAL?" A few nervous chuckles rippled through this formation. Parker glanced up from his tablet, expression carefully neutral. "You sure you're in the right place, ma'am? This isn't yoga class." Blackwood's voice carried across the yard. This time the laughter was louder, emboldened by their commander's example. Keshet remained expressionless, eyes forward, saying nothing. A droplet of seawater traced a path down her temple, but she didn't move to wipe it away. "No response, recruit? Maybe you left your voice in the women's locker room?" More laughter, but a few recruits shifted uncomfortably. Parker cleared his throat quietly. Keshet maintained her position, gaze fixed on a point beyond Blackwood's shoulder. The commander's eyes narrowed at her lack of reaction. Behind the formation, Recruit Drummond leaned slightly toward Recruit Ferris. "She showed up 3 days ago," he whispered. "Word is she's some political experiment from Washington." Ferris kept his eyes forward, but replied from the corner of his mouth. "How'd she even get this far? No way she passed the same qualifiers we did." Behind them, one of the instructors, Lieutenant Lachlan Rourke, stood with arms crossed, listening to the exchange. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes followed Keshet with unusual interest. Parker consulted his tablet, scrolled through something, then frowned. He started to step forward, but stopped when Blackwood raised a hand. The commander circled back to Keshet, studying her with newfound interest. Something in her posture had caught his attention. There was none of the defensive tension he usually saw in recruits under pressure, just stillness. "Since you've joined us late in training, Recruit Keshet, I'm curious about your water comfort level." His tone suggested he already knew the answer. The other recruits watched, sensing what was coming. Several smirked in anticipation. Blackwood snapped his fingers at Rourke. "Impromptu drown-proofing assessment, now." Rourke hesitated, something unusual for the normally prompt instructor. Sir, that's scheduled for next week. Now, Lieutenant, our guest deserves special attention. Blackwood's voice left no room for discussion. Parker stepped forward, tablet still in hand. Commander, protocol suggests additional preparation for unscheduled water evolution. Are you questioning my authority, Lieutenant? Blackwood didn't look at Parker as he asked the question. No, sir. Parker fell silent, but exchanged a quick glance with Quichette. Something passed between them, so brief that none of the others noticed. The training pool area was surrounded by concrete, its surface still dark with pre-dawn shadows. The water looked black rather than blue, reflecting nothing. Recruits gathered around the edges, atmosphere tense with anticipation. None of them had successfully completed drown-proofing yet. Most were dreading it. Lieutenant Rourke prepared zip ties for binding wrists and ankles. His movements were precise, but somehow reluctant. Standard procedure is 5 minutes, Blackwood announced to the gathered recruits. But let's give the lady a fighting chance. 2 minutes. Quichette stepped forward without hesitation. She removed her watch and a simple silver wedding band, placing them carefully at the edge of the pool. As she raised her arms to allow Rourke to bind her wrists, her sleeve pulled back slightly. Ferris, standing near the front of the group, noticed a faded scar on her wrist. It was shaped roughly like an anchor, but with an unusual barb on one fluker. His brow furrowed, recognition flickering across his face before confusion replaced it. Rourke bound Quichette's wrists in front of her, then her ankles. The zip ties were standard issue, black nylon, pulled tight enough to prevent escape, but not tight enough to cut off circulation. He checked them once, eyes meeting hers briefly. Remember, he said in a voice that carried to the recruits, the point is to prove you can stay calm when bound. Surface for air, sink back down, repeat until time's up. Quichette nodded once. Without waiting for further instruction, she slid into the water, disappeared beneath the surface with barely a ripple. Blackwood started the timer on his watch. The recruits leaned forward, curious despite themselves. 30 seconds passed. The water was still, dark. Some of the men started whispering, making quiet bets about how long she'd last, before panicking. $50 says she signals for help before the minute mark, one whispered. You're on. I give her 30 more seconds tops. At exactly 1 minute, Quichette surfaced briefly for air. Her technique was perfect, bobbing upright despite bound limbs, taking a controlled breath before sinking back down. There were no signs of struggle, no wasted movement. Blackwood's eyes narrowed as he observed her technique. The bobbing motion she used to surface was uncommonly efficient, a method taught to combat divers rather than basic trainees. His gaze shifted to Parker, who was pointedly looking at his tablet rather than his commander. Another 30 seconds passed. Quichette surfaced again, took another controlled breath, submerged. Ferris leaned toward Drummond. That's not beginner technique, he whispered. That's advanced operator work. What do you mean? Drummond asked. The way she's controlling her buoyancy. They don't teach that until after Bud S. That's the kind of thing you learn for actual operations. Other recruits had fallen silent, watching with growing unease as the timer approached 2 minutes. The 2-minute mark arrived. Quichette didn't surface. Rourke stepped toward the edge of the pool, concern evident in his posture. Time's up, he called. Blackwood raised his hand. Wait. 15 more seconds passed. No movement disturbed the water's surface. She should be coming up on her own, sir, Rourke said, voice taut. Give her more time, Blackwood replied, but his confident expression had begun to falter. 30 seconds beyond the time limit. The water remained. Still. No bubbles, no movement. Parker rushed to the edge. Something's wrong! As Rourke prepared to dive in, the water's surface broke. Quichette emerged, perfectly balanced despite her bonds, breathing controlled and measured. Water streamed from her close-cropped dark hair, down a face that showed no distress whatsoever. But instead of swimming to the edge as expected, she locked eyes with Blackwood across the distance. Her gaze held his for 3 full seconds. Then, deliberately, she sank back beneath the surface. The pool area fell silent. Even Blackwood seemed momentarily at a loss. What the hell is this? He finally demanded, turning to Parker. Parker hesitated, then reluctantly handed him the tablet. Sir, I tried to tell you earlier. The commander snatched the device, scanned the screen with growing disbelief. The document displayed was a partial service record, most details redacted with thick black lines. But the qualification dates visible were impossible for a new recruit. They indicated years of service, specialized training completed long before this course had begun. Blackwood's face drained of color. "Get her out," he ordered. "Now." 3 minutes and 15 seconds after first entering the water, Cachette surfaced at the far end of the pool. She performed a perfect dolphin kick to reach the edge despite her bound ankles. The movement was smooth, practiced, the kind of maneuver that comes only with years of training. Rourke helped her out of the water, and as he did, her sleeve pulled up further than before. There, partially visible on her upper forearm, was a tattoo that caused Rourke to freeze momentarily. A gold trident with 2 stars. The significance wasn't lost on those recruits with enough background knowledge. That specific marking wasn't just any military tattoo. It was specific to one unit, the most elite within the already elite SEALs. Blackwood saw it too. "Training evolution complete," he barked at the gathered recruits. "Clear the area, now." The men dispersed quickly, but not before exchanging confused looks. Something was happening that none of them understood. When only Cachette, Blackwood, Rourke, and Parker remained, the commander stepped forward, voice lowered but intense. "You're not a recruit. Who sent you?" Adira Cachette stood straight, water streaming from her uniform. Her expression remained composed despite the confrontation. "Commander, permission to complete today's scheduled training evolution?" "Drop the act," Blackwood snapped. "What unit?" "Devgru, sir, 3rd Squadron." Her voice was steady, professional. Rourke audibly inhaled. Devgru was the official designation for what most people called SEAL Team 6, the counterterrorism unit that operated at the highest levels of special warfare. Blackwood stepped closer, recognition dawning. "Cachette," he said, voice almost a whisper now. "Desert Storm, Euphrates River crossing." Cachette removed her cap, fully revealing her face with its thin scar running along the left temple. "I see my reputation precedes me." The morning sun had risen enough to illuminate the pool area now, burning away some of the fog. It caught the droplets of water still clinging to Cachette's uniform, creating a momentary halo effect around her figure. "Why are you here?" Blackwood demanded, though his tone had shifted from anger to something more complex. "I think you know why, Commander." She held his gaze without flinching. Back in the barracks, speculation ran wild among the recruits. None had clear information, but all had seen enough to know something unprecedented was happening. "Did you see that tattoo?" Ferris asked the small group gathered around him. "That was a Devgru trident, 2 stars. "What does that mean?" another recruit asked. "It means she's not just SEAL Team 6, she's senior leadership within the unit." Drummond shook his head. "That's impossible. There are no women in SEAL Team 6. "Officially," Ferris replied, "but there have been rumors for years about operators attached to Special Activities Division, gender-integrated units for specific missions." He lowered his voice further. "My brother worked support for Naval Special Warfare, said there were women who trained with them sometimes. Never officially part of the teams, but definitely operators." "So, what's she doing here, in recruit training?" Ferris stared out the window toward the admin building where Blackwood had taken Cachette. Nothing good for Blackwood, that's for sure. Inside the administrative building, Adira Cachette sat across from Commander Blackwood, now dressed in a dry uniform that properly displayed her rank insignia. The office was austere, little more than a desk, 3 chairs, and a wall of filing cabinets. "You've been sent to evaluate my command," Blackwood stated rather than asked. "Why the subterfuge? Why not come in officially?" "Would I have seen the real training environment that way?" Cachette countered. "Or would I have seen a carefully managed show?" Parker and Rourke stood at opposite sides of the room, silent observers to the confrontation. 3 recruits hospitalized last month, Cachette continued. 1 still in critical condition. That caught attention at levels you don't want to deal with, Commander. "Training for war isn't safe," Blackwood replied. "We lose people in training because we're preparing them for conditions that kill. Better here than in combat. There's a difference between tough training and abusive training. That line's been crossed under your command." Blackwood leaned forward. "My methods get results. We produce the finest special operators in the world." "At what cost?" Cachette's voice remained level, despite the challenge in her words. "Breaking recruits doesn't make them stronger. It just teaches them to break others when they're in charge." The commander stood, paced to the window. You've been out of the training pipeline too long, Commander. Things have changed. Wars change. Enemies change. Standards don't. Keshet opened a folder Parker had provided. These training records show systematic escalation of high-risk evolutions without corresponding safety protocols. That's not tough training. That's failure of leadership. Blackwood turned, anger flashing across his features. You have no idea the pressure we're under. Command wants numbers, not nurturing. They want more operators ready faster than ever before. What they want are operators who can think, not just survive. Keshet stood, her height nearly matching Blackwood's. You're creating automatons who follow orders out of fear, not professionals who can make decisions under pressure. Parker stepped forward, tablet extended. Sir, I've compiled the documentation of previous incidents, unofficially. Blackwood glared at his aide. You've been collecting evidence against your own command? I've been documenting concerns, sir, as regulations require. Rourke cleared his throat. Commander Blackwood, permission to speak freely? At Blackwood's curt nod, Rourke continued. I've had concerns about training intensity for months. The shift happened gradually, but we've crossed lines we shouldn't have. The dropout rate has increased, but not for the right reasons. We're losing good candidates because of unnecessary pressure, not because they can't handle the work. Keshet nodded her thanks to Rourke, then turned back to Blackwood. Tomorrow, 0500, all recruits, all instructors on the grinder. What for? To remind everyone what this program is actually about. Her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Blackwood's jaw tightened. And if I refuse your evaluation? Keshet held up a satellite phone from her pocket. One call, and your career ends today. Naval Special Warfare Command is waiting for my assessment. They'll have a replacement commander here by nightfall. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. But that's not why you'll comply. Why will I? Blackwood asked, voice tight with suppressed anger. Because despite everything, you still care about the program. You've just forgotten what it stands for. She nodded to Parker and Rourke, then stepped into the hallway. Blackwood followed her to the door. They'll never accept instruction from a woman, he called after her, a final attempt to regain control of the situation. Keshet didn't turn around. Good thing respect isn't about acceptance. It's earned in silence. As her footsteps faded down the corridor, Blackwood returned to his desk. A file lay open there, transferred from Parker's tablet. Keshet's service record, or what portions of it weren't classified beyond his access. Combat deployments, medals, commendations, and at the bottom, a personal note from Admiral James Harrington, Blackwood's former commander. Keshet sets the standard. Learn from her. Blackwood closed the file, looked up at Parker and Rourke. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain. Gentlemen, he said finally, it appears we have some preparations to make for tomorrow. The barracks fell quiet as the door opened and Lieutenant Rourke entered. The recruits stood at attention beside their bunks, eyes forward. At ease, Rourke said. Formation tomorrow at 0500, full uniform inspection. He paused, gaze sweeping across the faces before him. There will be changes to the training program effective immediately. After Rourke left, the questions exploded. What's happening? Is Keshet really DevGru? Are they shutting down the class? Ferris silenced them with a raised hand. It doesn't matter who she is. What matters is what happens tomorrow. He looked out the window toward the parade ground where, in the distance, a solitary figure walked the perimeter of the base. Whatever's coming, he said quietly. I think it's been a long time coming. What happens when the teacher becomes the student? When someone you've underestimated holds your future in their hands? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe if you want more stories about silent strength and the power of earned respect. Darkness still clung to the edges of the training compound as the clock ticked toward 0500 hours. The fog had thickened overnight, reducing visibility to less than 20 yards. It wrapped around buildings and training apparatus like a shroud, muffling sounds and creating an otherworldly atmosphere, perfect conditions for what was about to unfold. Recruits assembled on the grinder, their breath visible in the cold morning air. They stood at attention, uniforms immaculate despite the grueling schedule of the past days. No one wanted to give any ammunition to whatever was coming. Drummond shifted slightly, eyes darting toward Ferris. Heard Keshet got pulled yesterday. Too much for her. Ferris kept his gaze forward. That's not what happened, and you know it? Then what? Before Ferris could respond, Lieutenant Rourke's voice cut through the fog. Attention! The formation snapped straighter as footsteps approached. Commander Blackwood appeared first, his face set in rigid lines. He took position at the front of the formation without speaking. Behind him, Lieutenant Parker stood with his ever-present tablet. The tension radiating from both men was palpable. At precisely 500, another figure emerged from the fog. Lieutenant Commander Adira Cachet walked onto the grinder in full instructor uniform. The gold trident on her chest caught what little light penetrated the mist. Combat ribbons were arranged in precise rows above it. Her cap was tucked under one arm, revealing her face fully for the first time to most of the recruits. Complete silence fell over the yard. Even the ocean seemed to pause its eternal rhythm against the shore. "Attention on deck!" Blackwood's command rang out, though it was unnecessary. Every recruit was already frozen in place, eyes locked on the woman they had dismissed just 24 hours earlier. "This is Lieutenant Commander Adira Cachet," Blackwood continued, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of a man navigating a minefield. "She will be observing and evaluating all training procedures effective immediately." Shock registered on the faces of recruits who had mocked her the previous day. Confusion spread through others who couldn't process the reversal. "Commander Cachet is one of the most decorated combat divers in naval special warfare," Blackwood continued. "She has completed more submarine extraction operations than anyone in this command's history. She will be implementing adjustments to our training protocols." Cachet stepped forward, her posture relaxed but commanding. "I've spent the past 3 days as one of you," she began, voice clear and carrying across the yard without shouting. "Not to trick you, not to catch you out, but to understand." She began walking slowly along the front of the formation, making brief eye contact with each recruit. "This program isn't about breaking you, it's about building you. The difference matters." When she reached the end of the line, she turned to face the entire group. "Some of you questioned whether I belonged here? Fair enough." Her gaze lingered on Drummond, who swallowed hard. "I asked the same about some of your instructors." The implication hung in the air like the fog surrounding them. No one moved. "Today we're resetting," Cachet continued. "Starting with drown proofing, every recruit, every instructor in the pool at 600. I'll demonstrate the standard, the correct standard." She turned to Blackwood. "Commander, I'd like to review the full training schedule with your staff immediately." "Of course, Commander." Blackwood's tone was professional, but the muscle ticking in his jaw betrayed his discomfort. As the senior officers moved toward the admin building, the recruits remained at attention until Rourke dismissed them. The moment they were released, the questions erupted. What the hell just happened? Did anyone know she was an operator? DevGru? She seriously DevGru? Ferris watched the retreating figures of Blackwood and Cachet, his expression thoughtful. "She played us all," he said quietly, "and we failed the test." Inside the administrative building, the atmosphere was charged as Cachet faced the assembled training cadre. 8 instructors sat around a conference table, with Blackwood at its head and Cachet standing at a whiteboard. Tactical training schedules were pinned across the walls, punctuated by motivational quotes about pushing limits and embracing pain. "Gentlemen," Cachet began, "let me be clear about why I'm here. 3 recruits hospitalized in 4 weeks is not an acceptable casualty rate for peacetime training. 1 still hasn't regained full lung function." She turned to the whiteboard, wrote 3 names: Martinez, Calloway, Tennyson. She underlined the last name. "Tennyson may never dive again. That's not weeding out the weak. That's damaging valuable assets." "With respect, Commander," one of the instructors interjected, "SEAL training has always had casualties." "Casualties, yes. Preventable injuries, no," Cachet replied. "I've reviewed the incident reports. All 3 occurred during unauthorized training evolutions. Evolutions not in the approved syllabus." She fixed her gaze on Blackwood. Evolutions that appear nowhere in the official documentation, yet somehow became standard practice. The room fell silent. Several instructors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I'm not here to end careers," Cachet continued after the pause had stretched long enough. "I'm here to correct course. We start today with proper drown-proofing technique. Tomorrow, we revise the night evolution procedures. By the end of the week, this command will be back in compliance with naval special warfare standards." Blackwood leaned forward. And if we disagree with your assessment, Commander, then we can take it up with Admiral Harrington. I believe you know him well." The name landed like a depth charge. Admiral Harrington was not only Blackwood's former commander, but now the head of all naval special warfare. His support of Keshet's mission was implicit in her presence. "That won't be necessary," Blackwood replied, the fight visibly draining from him. "We'll cooperate fully." An hour later, the training pool area was transformed. What had been a scene of intimidation the previous day was now arranged for proper instruction. Keshet stood at the edge, now dressed in a standard-issue swimsuit that revealed more of her history than her uniform had. Scars mapped her body like a topographical chart of past missions. The anchor-shaped mark on her wrist was now fully visible, as was a long surgical scar across her left thigh. Most striking was the trident tattoo on her upper arm, the 2 stars beneath it indicating a level of operational experience few achieved. None of the recruits spoke as she addressed them. "Drown-proofing isn't about endurance," she began. "It's about technique and control. Survival isn't about how long you can hold your breath. It's about conserving energy when it matters most." She demonstrated proper bobbing technique, explaining each movement with precision. "Your lungs are your primary buoyancy device. Proper breath control lets you surface with minimal effort." When she finished the demonstration, she had Rourke bind her wrists and ankles with zip ties. "Watch closely," she instructed. "I'll show you the full evolution at combat speed." She entered the water smoothly. For 5 full minutes, she executed perfect technique, surfacing for air with such minimal movement that she barely disturbed the water's surface. When she completed the demonstration, the recruits and even some of the instructors applauded spontaneously. Over the next 2 hours, Keshet worked with each recruit individually, correcting technique, demonstrating proper body position, teaching the subtle skills that meant the difference between comfortable control and desperate struggle. By mid-morning, recruits who had been terrified of the evolution were executing it with growing confidence. Blackwood observed from a distance, his expression unreadable. When Parker approached with the tablet, he waved him away. "Not now." "Sir, Admiral Harrington is requesting an update." Blackwood's jaw tightened. "Tell him training continues according to Commander Keshet's directives." The morning transitioned to afternoon. Other training evolutions followed, each modified under Keshet's supervision. Navigation exercises, team movement drills, radio procedures. In each case, she demonstrated, corrected, improved. Never harsh, never berating, but accepting nothing less than the standard. As the sun began its descent, Keshet called the recruits together for a final briefing. They gathered around her, exhausted but alert, in a way they hadn't been under the previous regime. They were learning, not just enduring. "Tomorrow," she announced, "night infiltration training, 2,200 hours. Be prepared for cold water and difficult conditions, but also be prepared to do it right." She looked directly at Ferris and Drummond. "Questions?" Drummond raised his hand. "Commander, permission to speak freely?" At Keshet's nod, he continued. "Why did you let us believe you were just another recruit? Why not identify yourself from the start?" "Would you have shown your true colors if I had?" Keshet countered. "Would Commander Blackwood have run training the way he actually runs it? Or would I have seen a performance?" She looked around at the group. "Sometimes the only way to understand a situation is to experience it from the inside. I needed to know if what I'd heard about this command was true." "And was it?" Ferris asked quietly. "Yes and no," Keshet replied. "I found problems that need correction, but I also found dedicated instructors and recruits with real potential." Her gaze lingered on Rourke. "Sometimes good people get caught in bad systems. My job is to fix the system, not punish the people." As the recruits were dismissed, Blackwood approached Keshet. They stood watching the men disperse, an uneasy silence between them. "You've made your point," Blackwood said finally. "The men respect you. The instructors will follow your lead. Mission accomplished." "This isn't about making a point," Keshet replied. "It's about restoring standards that never should have slipped." "The standards changed. The world changed." "Did they?" Keshet turned to face him fully. "The standards were created in blood. They exist for a reason. Every shortcut you've taken, every enhancement to make training harder without purpose, undermines decades of lessons learned." Blackwood's expression hardened. "You have no idea the pressure we're under. Washington wants more operators, faster deployment cycles, quicker certifications. They don't care about tradition. And you caved to that pressure at the expense of your men. I adapted to reality, Blackwood snapped. Something desk. Officers at Naval Special Warfare Command wouldn't understand. Keshet's eyes flashed. I was pulling combat operations when you were still running qualifying courses, Commander. Don't lecture me about reality. She stepped closer, voice lowered. 3 nights ago, I was extracted from an operation in territory you don't have clearance to know about. I came straight here because what's happening in this command represents a threat to operational readiness that rivals anything our enemies are doing. The revelation hung between them. Blackwood's anger faltered, replaced by confusion. You were on deployment? Active mission? Until I got the call about Tennyson's condition, Keshet confirmed. His technique was perfect according to his previous instructors. The fact that he nearly drowned during a standard evolution suggests the standards here aren't just slipping, they're being actively undermined. That's an unfounded accusation. Is it? Keshet produced a small notebook from her pocket. Recruit evaluations show a systematic pattern. Those who question instructions, even when they perform well, are subjected to additional corrective training. Those who blindly follow orders, regardless of safety concerns, advance. She slipped the notebook away. You're not building operators, Commander. You're building automatons, and automatons die in the field. Before Blackwood could respond, Parker approached at a jog. Commanders, we have a situation. Medical just called. Recruit Tennyson's condition has deteriorated. They're airlifting him to Naval Medical Center San Diego. Keshet's expression tightened. When? Transport leaves in 20 minutes. She turned back to Blackwood. This conversation isn't over, but it will wait. As she strode toward the medical facility, Blackwood called after her. What about tomorrow's training? Proceeds as scheduled, Keshet replied without turning. With one addition, you'll be in the water with the recruits, Commander. Let's see if you still meet the standard you claim to uphold. The medical evacuation helicopter thumped overhead as darkness fell, its navigation lights blinking against the night sky. From the barracks window, Ferris watched it depart, carrying Tennyson to more advanced care. You knew her, didn't you? Drummond asked, joining him at the window. Before all this. Ferris didn't answer immediately. Not personally, he said finally, but I knew of her. My brother worked support for Naval Special Warfare Group 2, said there were rumors about a female operator who specialized in underwater infiltration, cold water expert. They called her the Ghost. Why Ghost? Because she could stay underwater longer than seemed human, would appear and disappear without warning during operations. Ferris turned from the window. I thought they were just stories. Well, she's real enough, Drummond replied, and she's completely overhauling training. Did you see Blackwood's face when she corrected his buddy breathing technique? Looked like he'd swallowed a sea urchin. Ferris nodded, but his expression remained troubled. There's more going on than a training evaluation. The way she and Blackwood talk, the tension between them, it's personal somehow. Maybe she just hates seeing the program corrupted, Drummond suggested. You heard what she said about building versus breaking. Maybe, Ferris conceded, but there's history there we're not seeing. Across the base in the administrative building, Keshet sat alone in a darkened office, scrolling through files on a secure laptop. The screen illuminated her face with a bluish glow, highlighting the scar along her temple. Outside, the fog had returned, pressing against the windows like a living thing seeking entry. A knock at the door interrupted her concentration. Enter, she called without looking up. Lieutenant Rourke stepped in, closing the door behind him. Tennyson stabilized, he reported. Doctors are cautiously optimistic. Good. Keshet continued scrolling through the files. You won't find what you're looking for in there, Rourke said after a moment. Now she looked up. What am I looking for, Lieutenant? The real reason for the changes in training protocol. Rourke stepped closer. The files that would explain that are kept offline. Commander Blackwood's personal records. Keshet leaned back in her chair, studying Rourke carefully. Why are you telling me this? Because I've watched 3 good men nearly die in training that used to be tough, but fair. Rourke's voice was quiet, but intense. Because something changed about 8 months ago, and no one will tell us why. Not even your commanding officer? Especially not him. Rourke hesitated, then reached into his pocket and produced a USB drive. These are the original training protocols, before the enhancements. and some personal notes I've kept. Keshet didn't reach for the drive immediately. This could be considered disloyal to your command, Lieutenant. My loyalty is to the program and the men, Commander, not to any individual officer. Rourke placed the drive on the desk. I've served under Blackwood for 3 years. He was a good officer, strict but fair. Then orders came from somewhere, and everything changed. Orders from where? That's just it. No one knows, nothing in writing, nothing official. Just Blackwood announcing new protocols with no explanation beyond adapting to evolving threats. Keshet picked up the drive, turned it over in her fingers. Why didn't you report this up the chain of command? I tried, got stonewalled. Rourke's expression hardened. Then Tennyson nearly drowned, and suddenly you appear, so I'm guessing someone finally listened. Keshet said nothing for a long moment. Thank you, Lieutenant. This stays between us for now. Rourke nodded and turned to leave, but paused at the door. One more thing, Commander. The night training tomorrow, the infiltration exercise. What about it? It's been modified too. Used to be challenging but achievable. Now it's... Rourke struggled for the right word. It's designed for failure. Explain. The course is longer, colder, with deliberate safety protocol violations. Last time we ran it, we had 2 hypothermia cases. Keshet's expression darkened. And yet, it's still on the schedule. Blackwood insisted, said it separates the committed from the merely interested. We'll see about that. Keshet slipped the USB drive into her laptop. Thank you, Lieutenant. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be interesting. After Rourke left, Keshet turned back to the computer. Files opened before her, revealing a systematic pattern of training modifications. Each change pushed further beyond safety parameters, each justified with vague references to operational necessity. But one document captured her attention completely, an email, partially redacted, from an unnamed source outside the normal chain of command. The subject line read simply, Project Threshold. The message was brief. Proceed with enhanced conditioning protocols. Psychological resilience parameters have been adjusted upward. Acceptable casualty rate increased to 15%. Results expected within 90 days. There was no signature, no indication of who had authorized such a dramatic departure from established standards. Just a code at the bottom, T7 Blackfish. Keshet stared at the screen, her reflection in the glass showing an expression that had hardened to granite. She reached for the secure phone on the desk, dialed a number from memory. This is Keshet, she said when the line connected. Authorization Bravo Echo 97 Tango. I need to speak to Admiral Harrington immediately. She waited, gaze fixed on the codename on the screen. Admiral, she said finally, we have a problem. Project Threshold isn't just a training modification. Someone's running an unauthorized psychological conditioning program within Bud-S. She listened to the response, her expression growing more concerned. Yes, sir, I understand. Another pause. No, Blackwood may not be the originator. The authorization comes from outside Navy channels. She disconnected the call after a few more exchanges, sat motionless for several minutes. The fog outside had thickened further, obscuring even the lights of nearby buildings. Decision made, she closed the laptop and secured it in a safe beneath the desk. Whatever was happening at Coronado went beyond training standards. Someone was experimenting with the psychological breaking points of elite operators, using the training pipeline as their laboratory. And tomorrow night's exercise would almost certainly be designed to push those limits even further. Morning arrived with unusual clarity, the fog having retreated temporarily to reveal a brilliant sunrise over the Pacific. Recruits and instructors moved through the day's evolutions with renewed focus, the presence of Commander Keshet elevating performance across the board. Blackwood participated in every exercise, demonstrating that he could still perform at the level he demanded of others. If he resented Keshet's presence or authority, he concealed it behind professional courtesy. But the tension between them remained palpable, electric in its intensity. As evening approached, preparations began for the night infiltration exercise. Equipment was checked, safety protocols reviewed, support boats positioned. On the surface, everything followed standard procedure, but Keshet noticed subtle deviations from the established playbook. The water temperature was colder than regulations permitted for extended immersion. The distance to be covered had indeed been increased beyond reasonable limits. And most concerning, the safety boats were positioned too far apart to provide adequate coverage. "This ends now," she said, approaching Blackwood as he supervised the final preparations. "The exercise is scrubbed until proper safety measures are in place." "On whose authority?" Blackwood challenged. "Mine and Naval Special Warfare Command's." Quichette handed him a printed order bearing Admiral Harrington's signature. "Effective immediately. All training returns to established protocols. Project Threshold is terminated." Blackwood scanned the document, his face draining of color. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter. What matters is that whatever experiment you've been running ends tonight." "You don't understand," Blackwood began, his voice dropping to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. "This came from above, way above, not my initiative." "I don't care if it came from God himself," Quichette replied. "It's over. We trained to standard, not beyond it. Anything else is just sadism masquerading as preparation." She turned to address the assembled recruits and instructors. "Night infiltration is postponed. All personnel return to barracks for equipment maintenance and rest. Tomorrow we'll conduct the exercise according to proper protocol." As the group dispersed, Blackwood grabbed Quichette's arm. "You have no idea what you're interfering with." She looked pointedly at his hand until he released her. "I know exactly what I'm interfering with, Commander. The question is, do you?" Later that night, as the base settled into uneasy quiet, Parker knocked on Quichette's door. His face was tight with tension when she opened it. "Commander, you need to see this." He handed her a tablet displaying a new email in Blackwood's inbox. The message was brief. "Proceed with threshold parameters regardless of interference. Confirm compliance by Aero 600. The signature line contained only that same code, T7 Blackfish. Quichette handed the tablet back to Parker. "Where's Blackwood now?" "That's just it, Commander. He's gone. Left the base 30 minutes ago." "And the recruits?" Parker's expression grew more troubled. "Being mustered for night training. Lieutenant Rourke is trying to delay, but the other instructors are following Blackwood's last orders." Quichette was already moving, pulling on her jacket. "Get me a direct line to base security, and find out who authorized that training activation." "Yes, ma'am." Parker hesitated. "There's one more thing. Before he left, Blackwood accessed the personnel files, your file specifically." Quichette paused. "What was he looking for?" "Not looking, Commander. Adding." Parker's voice dropped lower. "He input a medical restriction. According to the system now, you're prohibited from water training due to recent combat injuries." Understanding dawned in Quichette's eyes. "He's making sure I can't physically intervene." "Yes, ma'am." "Well, he's about to learn something about me that isn't in any file." Quichette checked her watch. "Contact Admiral Harrington directly. Tell him Project Threshold is still active and appears to be operating outside normal command structure." She strode down the hallway, purpose in every step. "And Parker, find out what Blackfish means. It's the key to all of this." At the water's edge, recruits were already being loaded into rigid inflatable boats for transport to the starting point of the infiltration course. The night was moonless, the water black and uninviting. Wind had picked up, driving the temperature down further and creating whitecaps across the bay. Lieutenant Rourke stood at the pier, arguing with another instructor. His face registered relief when he saw Quichette approaching. "Commander," he began, "I've been trying to delay as per your orders, but Commander Blackwood left explicit instructions to proceed." "Those instructions are countermanded," Quichette replied loudly enough for all to hear. "Everyone out of the boats. Training is suspended." The other instructor stepped forward. "With respect, Commander, we have orders directly from Commander Blackwood to proceed regardless of any outside interference." "Outside interference?" Quichette's voice was dangerously quiet. "I am a Naval Special Warfare Officer with direct authority from command to evaluate and correct this program. There is nothing outside about my authority, Lieutenant." She addressed the recruits still on the pier. "You men are being used as test subjects in an unauthorized psychological experiment codenamed Project Threshold. It has already resulted in multiple injuries and at least one career-ending condition." Murmurs spread through the group. Ferris and Drummond exchanged glances. "The infiltration course as currently configured violates no fewer than 7 safety protocols," Quichette continued. "Water temperature, distance, safety coverage, all below standard. This isn't training, it's hazing at best. Endangerment at worst." She faced the resistant instructor. Now, you can either comply with my orders, or you can explain to Admiral Harrington personally why you chose to ignore them. Your call." For a tense moment, it seemed the situation could go either way. Then Ferris stepped forward from the group of recruits. "Commander Quichette," he said formally, "request permission to stand down from the evolution pending proper safety measures." "Granted, Recruit Ferris." One by one, other recruits followed his lead. Within minutes, the entire class had effectively refused to participate in the compromised training. The opposing instructor's face flushed with anger. "This is insubordination." "No, Lieutenant," Quichette corrected. "This is proper judgment in the face of an unlawful order. Exactly what we want operators to exercise in the field." As the confrontation on the pier continued, no one noticed the figure watching from the shadows of a nearby building. Commander Blackwood observed the scene unfold, a satellite phone in his hand. He spoke quietly into it. She shut it down, completely. "The recruits are following her, not me." The voice that replied was distorted electronically. "That's unfortunate, Commander, but perhaps useful data nonetheless. Resistance to authority is itself a parameter worth testing." "What are my orders?" "Return to base. Continue as if nothing has happened. We'll contact you through secure channels with adjusted protocols." Blackwood pocketed the phone, his expression troubled, as he watched Quichette organizing the recruits' return to barracks. Whatever game was being played here, he was beginning to suspect he wasn't a player at all. Just another piece on the board. Across the base, Parker sat at a computer terminal, scrolling through classified databases. The search term, Blackfish, had returned nothing through normal channels, but his security clearance granted access to more restricted systems. Finally, a single entry appeared, heavily redacted. Project Blackfish, Psychological Resilience Enhancement Program. Objective: create operators capable of withstanding extreme psychological pressure without standard ethical constraints. Status: active. Authorization: T7 protocol. Parker stared at the screen, the implications sinking in. This wasn't just about tougher training or higher standards. Someone was deliberately pushing recruits beyond breaking points to identify those who could function without normal moral boundaries. They weren't building better SEALs. They were creating something else entirely. Have you ever witnessed someone standing up against a broken system? Someone with the courage to say, "This isn't right," even when everyone else accepted it as normal? Share your experience in the comments, and subscribe to see how Commander Quichette confronts the shadow organization behind Project Threshold in our final chapter. Dawn broke over Naval Amphibious Base Coronado with a different quality than previous mornings. The fog had retreated completely, leaving crystalline visibility across the training grounds. Sunlight caught on the water of the bay, transforming it from the threatening darkness of the night before to a gleaming surface full of possibility. Lieutenant Commander Adira Quichette stood at the edge of the parade ground, watching as recruits assembled for morning formation. They moved with purpose now, a unified sense of identity that hadn't existed before. Even their posture had changed, less about fear of punishment and more about professional pride. Lieutenant Parker approached, tablet in hand, as always. "Commander, Admiral Harrington is on base. He's requested your presence at the command center immediately." And Commander Blackwood, already there, along with several visitors who arrived by helicopter 20 minutes ago. They didn't sign in through normal channels. Quichette nodded. Project Threshold leadership, most likely. "There's more," Parker continued, lowering his voice. "I managed to access some of the Blackfish files. It's not just a training modification. They're identifying candidates for some kind of specialized unit, off the books, outside normal Navy structure. Psychological conditioning without ethical constraints," Quichette said. "Creating operators who will follow any order without question." "Yes, ma'am, and Blackwood may not be running it so much as participating in it. The actual authority appears to come from somewhere else entirely. Somewhere without accountability," Quichette finished the thought, "which makes it all the more dangerous." She straightened her uniform, checked that her trident was properly positioned. "Have Lieutenant Rourke continue with scheduled training. Standard protocols only. And if anyone countermands that order, then we'll know exactly who's aligned with Blackfish." Quichette started toward the command center, then paused. "Parker, I need one more thing. Pull Recruit Tennyson's complete medical file. I want to know exactly what happened to him." "Already done." Parker handed her a sealed folder. It's worse than we thought. The command center hummed with tense activity when Keshet arrived. Through the glass walls of the conference room, she could see Blackwood seated at the table alongside Admiral Harrington and 3 civilians in dark suits. Their conversation appeared heated. Commander Ellis, the base executive officer, intercepted Keshet before she could enter. "Commander, I need to brief you before you go in. This situation has escalated beyond training protocols." "I'm aware, Commander. Project Threshold is an unauthorized psychological conditioning program operating within BUD-S. Ellis looked surprised. "You've been thorough. Yes, and the personnel from Defense Intelligence Agency are here to shut down your investigation." "DIA?" Keshet hadn't expected that connection. "They have no authority over naval special warfare training." "That's the argument Admiral Harrington is making, but they're claiming national security priorities." Ellis glanced toward the conference room. "Just so you know where the battle lines are drawn." "Understood. Thank you." Keshet straightened her shoulders and entered the conference room. Conversation stopped abruptly. All eyes turned toward her. Admiral Harrington spoke first. "Commander Keshet, thank you for joining us. We were just discussing your findings regarding training modifications." One of the suited men, older with steel gray hair and cold eyes, studied Keshet with undisguised skepticism. "Commander, I'm Director Wells with Defense Intelligence Agency. I understand you've taken it upon yourself to interfere with specialized training protocols authorized at the highest levels. If by interfere you mean prevent unauthorized experimentation on Navy personnel, then yes, sir, I have." Keshet remained standing, her posture relaxed but commanding. "Commander Keshet," Blackwood began, his tone conciliatory, "these gentlemen have explained that Project Threshold has proper authorization, just through channels outside our normal chain of command. Then they should have no problem producing that authorization," Keshet replied. She placed Tennyson's medical file on the table. "Because what I see is evidence of deliberate endangerment of naval personnel for purposes that have nothing to do with SEAL qualification." Wells leaned forward. "Commander, some aspects of national security require approaches that may seem unconventional. Project Threshold identifies candidates with exceptional psychological resilience for specialized assignments. By pushing them until they break? By testing their limits in controlled conditions." Keshet opened the medical file, turned it toward Admiral Harrington. "Recruit Tennyson suffered pulmonary barotrauma during a night diving evolution that violated 6 different safety protocols. His medical records were subsequently altered to suggest a pre-existing condition. That's not testing limits, Director Wells. That's criminal negligence." Wells's expression hardened. "Commander, you're overstepping your authority. Project Threshold has clearances beyond your level." "Does it have presidential authorization for human experimentation?" Keshet countered. "Because without that, it violates the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the Geneva Convention, and U.S. federal law." Admiral Harrington studied the medical file, his face darkening. "Is this verified, Commander?" "Yes, sir. Lieutenant Parker recovered both the original and the modified records. The timestamps on the modifications correspond with the implementation of Project Threshold parameters." Blackwood shifted uncomfortably. "Admiral, I was assured all protocols had proper medical oversight." "You were lied to, Commander," Keshet said, "just as you lied to your instructors and recruits." The third civilian, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately, without junior officers present." "I don't think so," Admiral Harrington replied. "Commander Keshet was sent here at my direct order to investigate training irregularities. She stays." Wells tried a different approach. "Commander Keshet, your record in naval special warfare is exemplary. Multiple combat deployments, commendations for the Euphrates operation, qualified in ways that few operators ever achieve. You understand better than most the need for specialized capabilities in today's threat environment." "I do," Keshet agreed, "which is why I know that what you're doing isn't creating better operators, it's breaking good ones." She turned to Admiral Harrington. "Sir, I respectfully request permission to address the entire training cadre and recruit class. They deserve to know what's been happening and how it will be corrected." Wells interjected before Harrington could respond. "That's out of the question. Project Threshold remains classified." "Not anymore," said a new voice from the doorway. Lieutenant Parker stood there, accompanied by a military police officer. "Sir, I've forwarded the complete Project Threshold files to Naval Inspector General and the Senate Armed Services Committee. They're expecting the Admiral's call." Silence fell over the room. Wells and his colleagues exchanged glances that communicated volumes. Admiral Harrington broke the tension. "It seems transparency is inevitable, gentlemen. Commander Cachette, you have my permission to address the training cadre. Commander Blackwood will accompany you to demonstrate unified command." "With respect, Admiral," Blackwood began. "That wasn't a request, Commander. You helped create this situation. You'll help resolve it." An hour later, the entire BUD-S training contingent assembled on the grinder. Recruits stood in formation, instructors positioned behind them. The morning sun cast everything in sharp relief, leaving nowhere for shadows to hide. Admiral Harrington took position at the front, with Cachette and Blackwood flanking him. The Admiral's presence alone communicated the seriousness of the situation. He rarely visited training commands in person. "Over the past 6 months," Harrington began without preamble, "this training command has been operating under modified protocols that were implemented without proper authorization through the Naval Special Warfare Chain of Command." The recruits remained at attention, but a ripple of reaction passed through them, nonetheless. These modifications were not designed to create better SEAL operators. They were designed to identify candidates for a specialized program operating outside normal military structures. Harrington's voice carried across the yard without need for amplification. This was inappropriate, potentially illegal, and contrary to the values of naval special warfare. He turned slightly toward Cachette. Lieutenant Commander Cachette was sent to evaluate these modifications after several training injuries raised concerns at command level. Her investigation has been thorough, and her findings troubling. Harrington gestured for her to continue. Cachette stepped forward. "Effective immediately, all training returns to established protocols as outlined in the Naval Special Warfare Training Manual. These protocols were developed over decades of operational experience. They are designed to be challenging, but achievable, to build rather than break." She made eye contact with specific recruits as she continued. "Some of you have been subjected to unnecessary hardship and risk. For that, on behalf of Naval Special Warfare Command, I apologize." The unprecedented words caused another ripple through the formation. "However, your response to those conditions has been illuminating. When faced with improper orders last night, you demonstrated the moral courage we actually need in special operators, the ability to distinguish between difficult but necessary tasks and needlessly dangerous ones." Her gaze found Ferris, who had been first to stand down from the compromised night evolution. That judgment, that ethical decision-making under pressure, is the true measure of a SEAL, not blind obedience. Cachette turned slightly toward Blackwood. "Commander Blackwood will continue as officer in charge of this training command, but with adjusted parameters and oversight." Blackwood stepped forward, his expression solemn. "The modifications implemented under Project Threshold are hereby rescinded. We will return to proven methodologies effective immediately." His voice carried a hint of resignation. "I allowed myself to be convinced that extreme measures were necessary for modern threats. I was wrong. That error in judgment is mine to bear." It was as close to an apology as his position allowed, but the sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Admiral Harrington concluded the briefing. "Naval Special Warfare has a proud tradition of evolving to meet new challenges while maintaining core values. We lost sight of that balance temporarily. It won't happen again." As the formation was dismissed, Cachette noticed the 3 DIA representatives watching from the administration building, their expressions unreadable. They might have lost this battle, but she doubted they had abandoned their objective entirely. Some wars continued in shadows even after public victories. The day progressed with a new energy across the training compound. Instructors conducted evolutions according to standard protocols, challenging but fair. Recruits responded with renewed commitment, understanding now that the true test had never been about physical breaking points, but about moral ones. Cachette moved throughout the base, observing, occasionally offering guidance, but mostly allowing the natural rhythm of proper training to reassert itself. By afternoon, the transformation was remarkable. The atmosphere had shifted from fear-driven performance to purpose-driven excellence. She found Lieutenant Rourke supervising the obstacle course, stopwatch in hand, as recruits navigated the challenges in teams rather than as isolated individuals. Quite a difference. she commented. Rourke nodded. They're performing better with the standard protocols than they did with the enhanced ones. Fewer injuries, faster completions. Almost like the original standards were developed through years of actual experience, rather than theoretical psychology, Keshet replied, with the ghost of a smile. Commander, Rourke began, then hesitated. The recruits are talking. About you, about what happened. The story's growing. Stories tend to do that. They're saying you were sent to evaluate Blackwood specifically. That command knew something was wrong long before Tennyson's injury. Keshet watched a team of recruits supporting each other through a particularly challenging obstacle. What do you think, Lieutenant? I think naval special warfare protects its own, and I think you were protecting something more important than any individual career. The standards exist for a reason, Keshet said simply. They've been written in blood over decades. Abandoning them isn't evolution, it's amnesia. Later that afternoon, Keshet received word that recruit Tennyson's condition had stabilized further. He would recover, though his diving career was over. A small victory in the larger conflict, but one that mattered intensely to the young man, whose future had been casually jeopardized by Project Threshold. As evening approached, she found herself drawn to the pool where the confrontation with Blackwood had begun. The facility was empty now, the water still and reflecting the golden light of sunset. She sat at the edge, removed her boots, and dangled her feet in the water. Commander Blackwood's voice came from behind her. Peaceful now, hard to believe it was the center of so much conflict. Water always returns to its natural state given the chance, Keshet replied without turning. People can too. Blackwood sat beside her, though he kept his boots on. Admiral Harrington has accepted my request for transfer. I'll be leaving Coronado at the end of the month. That wasn't my objective. I know, but it's the right call. Blackwood stared at the water. I lost perspective, started believing that harder automatically meant better. We all get lost sometimes, Keshet said. The mark of a good officer is finding your way back. Is that forgiveness, Commander? It's understanding. There's a difference. She looked at him directly. You were manipulated by Project Threshold, but you also allowed yourself to be manipulated because it aligned with your preconceptions. Blackwood nodded slowly. About training, about who belongs in the teams, about a lot of things. They sat in silence for a moment, the water lapping gently against the sides of the pool. The DIA representatives are gone, Blackwood said finally. But I doubt Project Threshold is truly shut down. They'll just move it elsewhere, rename it, try again. Probably, Keshet agreed. The desire for operators without ethical constraints is nothing new. Every generation has to fight that battle again. She stood, water dripping from her feet onto the concrete. That's why the standards matter, Commander. Not just the physical ones, but the moral ones. They're our compass when the fog rolls in. The next morning arrived, with perfect clarity again, as if the weather itself was affirming the return to established order. Recruits assembled on the grinder for morning formation, instructors in their proper positions. Keshet observed from a distance, Parker at her side. Status report, Lieutenant. Recruit Tennyson will be discharged with full medical benefits. The training schedule has been reset to standard protocols. Admiral Harrington has initiated a full review of all Naval Special Warfare training commands to ensure no other unauthorized modifications are in place. And Project Threshold? Officially disbanded. Unofficially, the Senate Armed Services Committee has opened a classified inquiry into DIA's involvement in military training programs. Keshet nodded, satisfied with the outcome, but under no illusions that the larger war was won. And my next assignment? Orders came through this morning. You're to evaluate the training command at Little Creek once you've completed here. Looking for more Blackfish operations. Yes, ma'am. Admiral Harrington wants to ensure this was isolated to Coronado. She doubted it was, but that battle would come in its own time. For now, there was still work to be completed here. Blackwood conducted the morning briefing with renewed professionalism. The day's evolutions were outlined, safety parameters emphasized, objectives clearly stated. He was returning to the commander he had been before. Outside influences corrupted his perspective. As the recruits moved toward their first training station, Ferris approached Keshet. Permission to speak, Commander? Granted. The men wanted me to convey our appreciation for what you did. Ferris stood tall, his bearing reflecting the professional he was becoming. We understand now that the standard isn't just about physical performance. What is it about, Recruit Ferris? Integrity, ma'am. Doing the right thing even when it's harder, especially when it's harder. Cachette studied him thoughtfully. You were the first to stand down from that night evolution. That took courage. It wasn't courage, Commander. It was trust. In you, in what you represent. The standard, Cachette said with a hint of a smile. Yes, ma'am, the real standard. After Ferris rejoined his class, Cachette made her way to the administrative building where her temporary office had been established. There was still documentation to complete, recommendations to formalize, transitions to manage before she could move to her next assignment. She found a package on her desk, unmarked except for her name. Inside was a small wooden box, hand-carved with the sealed trident. A note accompanied it, unsigned but clearly in Blackwood's handwriting, for reminding us what the standard truly means. Inside the box was a set of gold jump wings, identical to those worn by the first generation of Navy frogmen who had established the legacy Cachette now worked to protect. 1 month later, the training compound at Naval Amphibious Base, Coronado operated with renewed purpose. Commander Blackwood had been replaced by a new officer in charge, one thoroughly vetted by Admiral Harrington personally. Lieutenant Rourke had been promoted to executive officer, his ethical stand during the Project Threshold crisis recognized and rewarded. The class that had experienced the transition had developed an unusual bond, forged in the crucible of moral as well as physical challenges. They moved toward graduation with exceptional proficiency scores and equally impressive teamwork evaluations. Lieutenant Commander Cachette stood on the observation platform overlooking the training pool. A new drown-proofing exercise was underway, conducted according to proper protocols under Lieutenant Parker's supervision. The recruits moved through the evolution with confidence built on proper training rather than fear of failure. Admiral Harrington joined her on the platform. Impressive transformation, Commander. They just needed proper guidance, sir. As do we all. Harrington handed her a folder. Your findings from Little Creek, another Project Threshold operation. Similar but not identical. They called it Operation Deepwater. Same objectives, different methodologies. Cachette had spent 2 weeks unraveling another unauthorized conditioning program on the East Coast. I've included recommendations for corrective actions. Already being implemented. Harrington closed the folder. The Senate inquiry is expanding. 3 more sites identified with similar unauthorized programs, all traced back to the same intelligence directorate. A coordinated attempt to create deniable assets. Exactly, assets without the ethical constraints that might prevent certain types of operations. Harrington's expression was grim. We've been down this road before. It never leads anywhere good. Cachette nodded her agreement. The standards exist for a reason. Indeed they do. Harrington turned to face her directly. Which is why I'm appointing you as Special Advisor for Training Standards across all Naval Special Warfare commands. Effective immediately. The promotion was unexpected. Sir, we need someone who understands why the standards matter, Commander. Someone who can recognize when they are being undermined and has the moral courage to stand against that pressure. Below them, a recruit successfully completed his drown-proofing evaluation, emerging from the water with controlled precision rather than desperate struggle. His classmates applauded spontaneously. Building rather than breaking, Cachette observed quietly. Exactly. Harrington extended his hand. Congratulations, Commander, or should I say, Captain. The promotion comes with the position. Later that day, as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, Cachette walked along the beach where recruits typically began their day with punishing physical training. The sand was empty now, marked only by the eternal rhythm of waves advancing and retreating. She removed her boots, felt the cool sand between her toes, and watched as the tide gradually erased all signs of the day's activities. Nature's own reset, preparing a clean slate for tomorrow's challenges. Recruit Ferris, now just days from graduation, approached along the waterline. He stopped at a respectful distance until Cachette nodded acknowledgement. Heard you're leaving us, Commander. New assignment. News travels fast. Good news especially. Ferris looked out at the horizon. Some of the men were wondering if you might attend our graduation. It would mean a lot, considering everything that happened. Cachette considered the request. I'll be there. Not in an official capacity, but I'll be there. Thank you, ma'am. Ferris hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been on his mind for weeks. Was it all a test? Your arrival as a recruit? Everything that followed? Was it all planned to expose Project Threshold? Quichette smiled slightly. Does it matter? I suppose not. The outcome is the same either way. What do you think happened, Ferris? He considered the question carefully. I think Naval Special Warfare saw something wrong and sent their best to fix it. I think you let us believe what we needed to believe to reveal our true characters. And I think you showed us what real leadership looks like. Sounds like a good story. The best ones usually are true, ma'am. Ferris saluted and continued down the beach, leaving Quichette alone with the waves and her thoughts. The sand beneath her feet shifted with each retreating wave, a reminder that foundations need constant attention to remain solid. In the distance, the sun completed its journey below the horizon, the last golden light catching on the waves like countless tiny tridents rising from the depths. Darkness would come, as it always did, but with it the certainty that light would return again. Quichette turned toward the training compound, its lights beginning to illuminate against the darkening sky. The cycle would continue, as it had for generations. Young men and women would be tested, challenged, pushed to their limits, but not beyond. Standards would be upheld, not because they were comfortable or easy, but because they had been written in the blood and sacrifice of those who came before. And when the fog of confusion or corruption inevitably rolled in again, there would be those who remembered why the standards mattered, who would stand against the darkness until clarity returned. It wasn't just about building better operators. It was about preserving the soul of the service itself, one training class at a time. Some battles are fought with weapons, others with courage and conviction. The hardest ones are fought from within, where the only true standard is the one we hold ourselves to when no one else is watching. Have you ever witnessed the quiet courage of someone who stood for what was right when it would have been easier to go along with the crowd? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more stories about the heroes who fight the battles we rarely see, but that define who we truly are.